Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology, and today we are going to take a look at your rising sign horoscopes for the month of July 2021. I'm going to walk you through what the transits are, what dates they're happening for everybody, and then we'll start walking it through each individual sign. Now, given that there are a number of, there's kind of two different T-squares going on this month, meaning three different planets and three different signs perfecting. Um, that means that we have multiple house topics being activated at different times. There, so what I'm doing is throwing out a lot of different topics that can get activated when those houses are activated with these transits. The idea for you is, if you're listening, is to just listen and get your bearings. Okay, these different topics are being activated, and then you can see, if you just think a little bit about the sort of karmic fault lines in your life right now, you get a feeling for where those events are most likely to occur. So that's what we're doing. And as always, I love hearing your stories. I love hearing, how these transits end up landing in your life. So, feel free to leave me your stories in the chat box. I always like hearing from you. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and put the chart up on the screen. I'm going to walk you through the transits first, give you the dates, and then I'll walk through how they're applying for all 12 signs without repeating the dates every single time. So here is here are the transits that are perfecting. July 1st, you're going to see Mars opposite Saturn. And then by the 3rd, you're going to see Mars square to Uranus. Okay, so the 1st and the 3rd, you get Mars opposite Saturn, Mars square Uranus. I'm going to talk about that for all 12 signs. On the 6th, we're going to see Mercury's final square to Neptune, which I will only be talking about for the mutable signs because it will land in your angular houses. Then on the 6th, especially the fixed signs, you fixed signs out there, fixed rising signs are getting a ton of action this month. That would be Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius. Here's Venus opposing Saturn on July 6th. And then you'll see Venus squared to Uranus on the 8th. Venus is squared to Uranus on the 8th. And then kind of a nice grand finale, you'll see Venus and Mars get together in a conjunction after all of this on the 13th, kind of potentially bringing some resolution if there has been conflict in different areas of your life. So that's kind of good news for everybody. Especially, I'll be talking about my Leo and Aquarius risings. But at any rate, finally on the 17th, the Sun will oppose Pluto. So we're walking through about the 17th of the month. Now, the reason I'm not going beyond that is because this is where the main action of the month is. The transits beyond there are not as potent, in my opinion. And I will be doing a few videos walking through the rising signs, for example, when Jupiter returns to Aquarius by retrograde. So later in the month, I'll be doing some refresh on all 12 signs for people. So the first half of the month is really where the focus is at. And we're going to begin with Aries. So if you're in Aries rising, these transits are falling across three houses where you could see conflict and then eventual resolution by the 13th when Venus and Mars get together. Now, the reason I say conflict first is both of these planets have to go through the opposition and square to Uranus, and then they can join. You always want to focus on the place where the faster moving planets are located, because as they're aspecting these slower moving planets, they tend to bring the action into the house that they're located in. So for Aries individuals this month, Venus and Mars are located in your 5th house. This is kind of like the anchor point. And the Venus-Mars 5th house dynamic has a lot to do with romance, sexuality, children, pregnancy, as well as anything that brings joy, pleasure, or happiness. For example, creativity, the arts, going out to restaurants for the first time, or getting together with friends and you don't have to wear your masks, or whatever the case might be. So, or just, working on a creative project or doing something that brings joy, that's new and exciting. Well, when you see Mars and Venus going through these dynamics with Saturn and Uranus, the first thing that comes to my mind is, what is blocking you from feeling good right now? Whether it's in your relationships or your love life, or whether it's with your children, or whether it's something to do with creative project that you're working on? Just where is your joy feeling prohibited, or where are you feeling inhibited? And how are you working through that this month? This strikes me as the most important thing for Aries individuals, Aries rising. Now, if you're looking at the opposition to Saturn in the 11th, part of the stress is coming from groups of people or organizations or friends or social dynamics or allies, or something about the social dimension of your life might be part of the challenge. At the same time, there's questions about money or finances, or the desire for change, growth, and a bit of a revolution around money and finances. Anything to do with assets, resources, investments, that's going to be Uranus in the second. So pressures from the house of friends, groups, allies, as kind of your social house, as well as the place of money, resources, finances, business. Those are, there's pressures coming in there from those areas that relate back to this house that has to do with pleasure, joy, fun, again, children, sex, romance. And so that's kind of the conglomeration of energies that we're seeing. Whatever the tension is, the opportunity for some kind of synthesis or harmonization is there by the 13th. Okay, so that's the T-square energy in your succeedent houses 11, 2, and 5, with an emphasis on house 5, which was traditionally called the joy of Venus and a house of pleasure. So anything related to joy, pleasure, happiness, whether it's sensual or creative, or again, the topics of children and pregnancy. Now, we're going to go through a few others. So on the 6th of the month, remember that there's also going to be an applying square between Mercury and Neptune. In the midst of all of this, there could be some confusing communication patterns or some unclear boundaries mentally or verbally, as well as, watching for non-ordinary or very intuitive states of mind or consciousness to play a role in the first half of the month, because of Mercury going into the square to Neptune from the 3rd house, which is a place of communication and mind. So watch for that in the midst of all of this. Then finally, on the 17th, we see the sun moving through an opposition with Pluto from the 4th to the 10th. I like that as a real moment. Again, if we anchor the transiting planet down in the 4th, change, transformation, growth relative to home and family or living environment or roots, but with some kind of connection to the career house. So I like that as a very powerful, very quick, but powerful transit right around the 17th of the month. So that's, if you're an Aries rising, that's how I'm seeing it play out. All right, so let's move forward to Taurus rising. Now, if you're a fixed sign this month, these transits that I've been talking about already throughout for Aries, and already at the very beginning of the video, these series of T-squares, if you're a fixed sign like Taurus, or Leo or Scorpio or Aquarius, these energies are a lot more potent because they're falling into your angular houses. So it's a really good idea to understand where the focus of that is. For you right now, the focus is in the 4th house, which is home, family, living environment. For example, I'm a Taurus rising, and this month, excuse me, we have a little bit of work being done here at our new house, and we're still, moving in. And as you guys know, it takes a while to move in, but we have some fixer-upper type of things that we're doing. Contractors that'll be in and out. We're going to visit family. We have family coming into town to visit. It's my 40th birthday. So a lot of emphasis around home and family this month. Now, I know, because I'm an astrologer, that this means that there could be a little bit of tension. Why? Because there's going to be some stress coming from the workplace for me simultaneously. Got Saturn opposing in the 10th, and the need to be free or to change or transform personally, physically, that's going to be there as well. For example, some of you guys know I shared that I just decided to start taking some jujitsu lessons this past week. And I'm, of course, all jazzed about that right now. I'm really loving it. It's really fun. So the pressure to want to do that, to exert myself physically, to be involved in that, while there's also perhaps mounting pressures at, work, new classes starting, and a speaker series in July that I'm hosting. And then let's say stuff going on at home. So you can just kind of feel those 3 areas of pressure with the root of the emphasis is in the fourth house of home and family. So watch for that to be a bit of a pressure cooker. But by the 13th, with Venus and Mars conjoining in the fourth, things should come together and there should be kind of a happy feeling in the air. Okay. Now, remember on the 6th, we're going to see Mercury's square to Neptune. Now, on the 6th, that could mean that there is something happening around money or finances, with the emphasis of Mercury being in the second house. Always look at that transiting planet's location from to the slower moving planet. So changes around money or finances, it'd be an easy time to be deceived about something or to work through something that you're having a hard time understanding or that's been unclear. The reason for that is that Mercury's been back and forth with Neptune. And by now, perhaps Mercury's about to figure out something it's been working on for a while, or it's about to deal with something around finances or money, or something like that. So watch for some kind of shift around money and finances, but also be careful about boundaries around money, and especially the tension coming from the 11th house, which is a place of groups, friends, allies. So, business and friends, business and groups, money and groups or friends, there could be some tension around those areas. Okay, so at any rate, then the last one is on the 17th, the sun opposite Pluto. Now, the sun's opposition to Pluto is across the 9th and the 3rd. So I like this as a moment of philosophical or mental or intellectual transformation and understanding, maybe some kind of breakthrough in terms of communication with other people, and or intellectually or spiritually or philosophically, because these two houses, when you get real intense kind of Plutonian transformation across them, they often result in paradigm changes. So I like this as a kind of a moment of mental or intellectual or spiritual breakthrough, middle of the month. That's about the 17th. Okay, so I'm going to push this forward now, and we're going to go to Gemini rising. The mutable signs rising this month, the Mercury square Neptune dynamic in particular is really strong. So we're going to come back to that. We're going to spend a little bit of time on that for sure. But the fixed energy is the storyline for everyone for the month. And the T square is happening from your third house. So you've got Venus and Mars in Leo in your third, working through opposition to Saturn and Uranus in the 9th and the 12th. When you have that Venus Mars dynamic in the third, it's a place of mind. It's a place of communication. It's a place that speaks to your daily environment, everyday, kind of everyday hustle and bustle of the everyday environment. I like to say, it's the common stuff that you do, the paths that you walk or bike or buses that you take or the commuter path that you take. It's the common things that you do around the house. It's your neighborhood, but it's also your mind, and it has a lot to do with the environment around you. So with Mars, Venus in the environment around you, there could be some kind of stresses or challenges this month in terms of, intellectual or philosophical or political or kind of ideological conflicts. That's because of the opposition to Saturn in the 9th. And I'll just highlight that. So you have pressure coming from Saturn in the 9th, which can be kind of like principled ideological conflicts. Maybe they're going through them internally, but maybe they are infiltrating certain relationships, or they're just becoming really felt in the environment somehow. And then also you can have Uranus in the 12th house, and Uranus in the 12th house, you could think of Uranus in the 12th house as provoking a kind of an unconscious revolution. It will bring things up like triggers and reactions that aren't totally conscious. And so you do have to be really careful of the potential for a little bit of like an unconscious, it's almost like not knowing that there's a live wire somewhere. And so that's going to tone things a little bit this month. And just to be careful of that, basically. So, so those energies pressing in on Venus, Mars in the third can create an environment of mental stress or just relational stress for the first part of the month, all the way up until about the 13th, when Venus and Mars conjoin, at which point you should see things starting to harmonize or resolve themselves if there has been some aura of conflict. The next one is when we're looking at, for all of the mutable signs around the 6th, Mercury square to Neptune. if you're Gemini rising, this is your ruling planet moving through a square with Neptune in your 10th house of career. So I think a lot about, how is your mindset changing this month? How is your sense of core identity, purpose, direction changing or being questioned or called into question relative, especially to the workplace? You've been going through this for a while. The month of June was a big one for you in this regard because of the eclipse in your first house and the square to Neptune. So yeah, like just know that around July 6th, Mercury's square to Neptune could bring something to a head that's been boiling for like it's kind of been trying to come out and express itself or get clear about something. Maybe there's been some degree of confusion about something, but I like this idea of clarity and understanding things around personal sense of identity and purpose and relation to career. Could be quite a powerful moment right around the 6th. Now, finally, on the 17th, we have the sun moving through an opposition to Pluto across your second and eighth houses. That could be quite a powerful moment with regard to money and finances, either your own or other people's. Those tend to be the financial houses, 2 and 8. So I like this as a moment of, deeper transformation around money and perhaps the influence or role that money plays in marriage or relationships. Maybe there's investments or debts are being paid off. Be careful about what kinds of things you get into or give away or take. Because, sometimes with Pluto, it's like we don't always know exactly. We may not want exactly what we're being given. It may not turn out exactly as we want it to down the road. So it's just a little bit of a buyer beware, caveat emptor, is that what the phrase is, around this transit on the 17th. But I like this just as a powerful moment of transformation around money and finances, or around debts, obligations, and burdens being transformed or lightened somehow. Maybe new potentials for collaboration or something that's being offered or something like that. But at any rate, that comes around the 17th. So that's what I've got for you, Geminis, this month. Let's move it forward to Cancer. Now, if you are a Cancer, arguably one of the biggest transits of the month is going to be that Sun-Pluto opposition on the 17th. So we're going to come back around to that. But let's talk about the T-square. The T-square has to have its bearing. So where is it? It's the second house. If you are a Cancer rising, then this is coming from the house of money and finances. This is the financial area of your life, and it could be experiencing some tension from the eighth house. That's the eighth house Saturn, as well as the 11th house Uranus. So if money, finances, assets, resources, possessions, if those things are being tested from the eighth house, it could mean that there are debts that are coming up, or big payments to be made, or big bills that are due, or obligations that are kind of, holding you back from things that you might want to do right now. Or it could be that dynamics around money and marriage or relationships are a little bit more stressful or tense. It could also be that the Venus-Mars dynamic with Uranus in the 11th house is bringing up some tension from the place of friends, groups, and community. So how could those two areas collectively be working on the financial house? Well, they could be making it tough to know what your priorities are right now. Where should I place my money? How should I make my money? Or with regard to any kind of business and the direction that you want to take your business in, or how do I want to use my assets? What do I feel aligned with or not in terms of my values, and how those translate into what I do or how I make money or how I use my money. So those kinds of things could be a little bit tense. And, but I like this as a moment of, kind of, there will be a moment of harmonization around the 13th when Venus conjoins Mars in your financial house. So if there's a little stress financially in the first part of the month, things will really come together, and there'll be kind of like a moment of harmonization around money and finances and resources and so forth by the 13th. Now, there's also a Mercury square Neptune moment from the 12th house to the 9th house. Mercury will square Neptune on the 6th. Now, from the 12th to the 9th, I like this as a moment of understanding unconscious things that are in the unconscious. Mercury in the 12th with Neptune in the 9th can often be we're receiving insights from dreams, or there's some kind of breakthrough in our understanding, or like I find that when I have transits across this axis, if I'm reading or studying something, I'll suddenly start to understand things that have been hard to understand, or a lot of things will start coming together in so my understanding will grow or expand, or something will kind of come together. Mercury, Neptune across this house axis, you also have to be careful for hidden or deceptive forms of communication, or almost like self-sabotaging, and also, potentially some of the shadows around educational organizations or religious institutions, something like that. But generally speaking, I like this as a moment of starting to understand things that maybe are not usually in your conscious understanding. It's a good combination for understanding what's in the unconscious or subconscious. Finally, for you Cancer risings out there, the biggest transit of the month arguably is the Sun opposite Pluto on the 17th. That's across your first and seventh house. So I like that as a moment of real breakthrough in relationships. It's a tremendous moment of transformation across the house of identity and self and body, and the house of others, interpersonal relationships, marriage. So this is a real powerful moment of catharsis. It's temporary. It's not like it's, but depending on what's going on in your birth chart, that could be the trigger for a pretty big moment if you have planets in those signs and around those degrees, right about 25, 24, 25, Cancer and Capricorn in particular. But at any rate, so watch for a moment of catharsis in, around identity and relationships right around the 17th. Okay, so we're going to take it forward now to Leo rising. Now, if you're a Leo rising, I would say you have the biggest horoscope of the month, hands down, because maybe Aquarians a little bit too, but Venus and Saturn are anchoring the T-square to, Venus and Mars are anchoring the T-square to Saturn and Uranus from your first house. That's the house of identity, of body, of self. When you get the pressure coming from Saturn in the seventh, that means that there's challenges in relationships with other people, or social challenges. And there's also challenges in the workplace. You can see Uranus from the 10th, Saturn in the seventh. So stress and tension coming in from workplace, you could say, and then from the relational sphere of your life. And they're coming in to the place that really has to do with my sense of identity, my core sense of purpose, my core sense of meaning and value, my physical body, my vitality and health. So there's potentially power struggles this month, and real kind of like a crisis of identity or meaning or purpose for Leos. It'll be real intense, potentially up until about the 13th. Then Venus and Mars come together after they've gone through the gauntlet of Saturn and Uranus. And I think by then you should be feeling clear. Maybe it's time to make important decisions, but maybe by that time you've got a real clear sense of where you need to go based on what other people are asking for that you can or can't give, or what work is demanding that you can or can't give. Where do I want? What am I feeling good about? What am I not feeling good about? So you should feel good about where things are at again by the 13th when Venus and Mars come together. Now on the 6th, we're going to see the Mercury-Neptune dynamic across the 11th and the 8th. Makes me wonder about social contracts for you this month. What kinds of expectations have you placed on yourself, or have other placed on you within groups or organizations, or in kind of like different social settings in your life, whether they're professional or among friends or in a religious or academic setting or something like that. But Mercury in the 11th square Neptune has been going on back and forth all the month of June and now into July. And it makes me wonder about loyalties and about communication dynamics within groups of people, and what kinds of things you may be getting entangled with. You want to be really careful. Neptune in the 8th can suck you into other people's drama and make you somehow responsible for other people when you really shouldn't be. On the other hand, it can be a transit that suggests, getting aligned with some greater purpose or vision or community effort, and using resources to putting resources towards some kind of larger vision. But even then, you would want to be careful about boundaries, in particular with this particular transit. So watch for that around the 6th. And again, it could be culmination of a process around these kinds of topics that have been going on since June. Okay, so last but not least, we also have the sun opposite Pluto, and that's going to come in around the 17th. That's across your 6th and 12th houses. Now, I feel like, you know, that energy in particular in the cadent houses 12 and 6, sometimes you don't necessarily experience it so directly. Like it'll be something around you or in your family, or, you know, like, of course, for everybody this month, the sun Pluto can be a very powerful moment for, in terms of fathers and the karma of fathers and dads and things like that, or authority figures. But this moment could be one where questions about your personal, what are your personal blind spots? This is your ruling planet. The sun is a Leo, and the sun in the 12th is kind of like a blind spot. So it's getting triggered by Pluto in the 6th. So I'd be careful of like what you're getting emotionally triggered by around this time, and also how you're dealing with or relating to authority figures or with your own authority or ego. This could be a moment that is a little bit more challenging for your ego, or looking at blind spots. That's right around the 17th. Okay, so that's what I've got this month for Leo risings. We're going to move this forward to Virgo risings. Now, if you're a Virgo rising, the T-square energy is being anchored by Venus and Mars in your 12th house. And then you've got the connection to Uranus in the 9th and Saturn in the 6th. Now, if you're a Virgo, this has a lot to do with, again, the 12th house, things that you don't necessarily see. The 12th house was considered a blind spot to the first house, which was the house of the native. So the 12th house, you could say, is like the native or individual's blind spot. That could be your own demons. It could be people that are sneaking up on you somehow, or situations that are sneaking up on you, things that are in the unconscious or subconscious. So you have to be real careful this month with Venus and Mars there, especially around things like sexuality, relationships of all kinds, and how those relationships might be, you know, sabotaging you, or you might be sabotaging yourself, or looking at what kinds of relationships are healthy for you and which are not, looking at, you know, the social dynamics of your life. You know, this could be a time where you're dealing with harder stuff in relationships, in particular conflicts, power struggles, not feeling loved or liked, issues around loyalty. And then simultaneously, the Uranus square in the 9th house could have some bearing on like a place of education, a religious group, religious or spiritual values, and things like that. So Uranus in the 9th could be speaking to, you know, something this month that they're like, your ideals or values are somehow at the forefront of challenges in relationships, and also questions that have to do with where your loyalties lie. So that's what I would be looking at for Virgos. But for my Virgo risings, I would really love to hear from you guys, because you guys have a really big month this month. So if you're a Virgo rising, please, you know, come back, write a note and tell me how some of these transits went and what you saw. I always like hearing from people. Now, this is the big one for you if you're a Virgo too, if you're a mutable sign. Mercury square to Neptune. Now, Mercury square to Neptune is going to happen around the 6th. That's happening from your career house to the house of relationships. Now, Mercury Neptune can create some confusion, potential lack of clarity, or, you know, you really want to be careful of things like gossip or, you know, kind of deception, both at work or possibly in relationships. Also, this is a transit that has been going on for a while. Like the month of June was sort of punctuated by an eclipse in your career house, Mercury retrograde in your career house. So maybe sort of one last moment of adjustment or change or shifting from the career house, Mercury in the career house. But hitting Neptune in the 7th house, there's questions about relationships and communication in relationships that seem to be at the forefront of this dynamic. So watch for some overlap between the house of marriage and relationships, the house of work or profession, right around the 6th. Now, this T-square energy that I had mentioned with Mars and Venus, by the way, watch for resolution around some of those challenges or conflicts by the 13th. That's when Venus and Mars will conjoin, and you should be feeling a little bit better by then. So just as a side note. Now, finally, the Sun will oppose Pluto on the 17th from the 11th house to the 5th house, with the Sun moving through the 11th as the anchor of this transit. I like this as a moment of greater change socially or within groups. So it's Cancerian. So, emotional bonds with people and communities or groups are being changed or transformed somehow for you right around the 17th. So you could watch for those transits of the month. I'd love to hear from my Virgos in particular this month because, not only have you just had eclipses, now you've got Mercury coming back through the square to Neptune. You've got your Venus Mercury stuff going on in the 12th. I'd love to hear some stories and hear what it ends up, feeling like for you guys. All right. So for my Libras, if you're a Libra rising, we are anchoring this T-square energy, the first part of the month, with Venus and Mars in the 11th house, which is the place of groups and communities, friends, allies, benefactors, anyone or anything that serves as a resource that is conducive to your ambitions in the world and your career. Those are 11th house things. So the 11th house, pretty good. It was called the joy of Jupiter. And Jupiter is a planet of abundance. So I really like Libra rising. The energy for Libra risings this month feels really good. However, the challenges are coming from Saturn in the 5th and Uranus in the 8th. So where will the pressures be because of this T-square dynamic? You're going to get it from the 5th house, which is a place of personal joy, happiness, pleasure, sexuality, creativity. The 8th house, which has to do with debts or obligations to other people or that other people have to us. Uranus in the 8th tends to want to break free of such debts or bondage. It wants to rewrite the kinds of social karmic contracts that we have. It wants to get rid of debts, wants to be independent, right? Then you have Saturn from the 5th, which tends to be a little bit of a joy killer. This is interesting. It makes me think that there's a desire for something new socially in your life if you're a Libra, but you're having to work through what gives you pleasure and what doesn't, and what do you want to be bonded to and what don't you want to be bonded to. And that'll resolve itself by the 13th, that kind of those pressures around who and what you like or want or desire in terms of friends, groups, social environment, and what gives you joy or happiness and what you want to be free of or bonded to and what you don't want to be. Those are, and again, Venus and Mars conjoin after going through this by the 13th. Now, then we have the Mercury-Neptune dynamic. This is going to get a little philosophical for you. Mercury in the 9th, the higher mind, questioning, learning, institutes of, like higher learning and education come into focus. Neptune in the 6th, the place of conflict. So maybe there's a little bit of like working through, ideological differences, philosophical differences, but trying to do so in a way that is recognizing of diversity or differences, trying to unify divergent opinions, but trying to do so carefully, not just deceptively or not just trying to, passively smooth something over that will be a problem later if you don't address it carefully now. Those are some of the things that I see for Libras right around the 6th. Then we can go to the 17th. You're going to see the Sun opposite Pluto. Now the Sun is in the 10th. That's the anchor point. So what does that mean? The transformation comes in the career house, but it's being fueled by these subterranean impulses and powers down in the house of home and family or living environment or ancestry, roots. So, but there's change there in the professional house. Questions about, your emotional dynamism in the career place right around the 17th of the month. Just watch for kind of a powerful surge of transformative energy in the career house right around the 17th. Okay, so we're going to push it forward to Scorpio on the ascendant. Now, if you're a Scorpio rising, where's the anchor of this T-square? For the fixed signs, it's big stuff this month. Maybe Scorpio, arguably another one of the really big ones. Venus Mars going through the gauntlet of the T-square from the 10th house of career. That means the anchor point is your focal point is your career house. So when you see Venus and Mars trying to come together in the career, they're trying to bring harmony to the career place. They will by the 13th, but first they have to go through pressures coming from Saturn in the 4th house of home, family, living environment, and then Uranus in the house of relationships or marriage, or more like important interpersonal dynamics. So those stresses are going to come through all the way up until about the 8th. Then by the 13th, you'll see the harmonization of Venus and Mars in the career house. So, don't be surprised if you're moving in the right direction professionally right now, but there are some tensions that have to be worked through and some challenges coming in from both relationships and family simultaneously. So, I don't think it's 2 weeks, so it's not the end of the world, but it's a very powerful one for Scorpio risings. Now let's look at Mercury square to Neptune. When you look at Mercury square to Neptune, you can see that Mercury is going to be making the square from the 8th house. So that's going to be our anchor point. The 8th house is going to be what we owe other people or what other people owe us. You can think about that very broadly. It could be money, it could be karmic debts. So when Mercury goes through the square to Neptune, you have to be careful that you're not drinking the Kool-Aid. Like someone's offering you something that's glittery, it looks really good, but maybe it comes with a price tag. It's like if someone's offering you a cocktail, looks really good, but if you're someone who has a quick time getting, gets addicted to things quickly, say no, right? So it's that kind of thing. Mercury to Neptune in the 5th, a place of pleasure, could be offering some kind of entanglement with other people that's essentially, what do you want to call it? Alluring, but is it worth it? Be really discerning about that. On the other hand, I could see this being a moment of sharing something with someone else that's been thought through really well and carefully over the last month or so, because we had a Mercury retrograde that has gone through the square to Neptune a few times already. So maybe you're finally figuring something out about what are the right kind of boundaries that I should have? What's the right kind of sharing that I should have with someone or not? What's the right kind of pleasure or joy or happiness? And how can it be shared, but without losing myself? So those kinds of questions, for sure, peaking right around the 6th. Finally, the sun opposite Pluto across your 3rd and 9th, with the sun as the focal point in the 9th, place of the higher mind, the place of religion, spirituality. I like there being some kind of philosophical, spiritual transformation right around the 17th of the month. Watch for kind of like a intellectual or spiritual breakthrough, a moment of teaching or being taught something. So we'll watch for that. Now that's Scorpio. Let's move forward to Sagittarius. So if you're a Sagittarius, the T-square energy comes through the 9th, 3rd, and 6th house axis, with the focal point being Venus and Mars in the 9th house. Now, you've just had eclipses across your 1st and 7th house. We've got to talk about Mercury in Neptune in the 7th. That's probably maybe the biggest transit of the month for my Sages. But these T-squares are very potent. And there's such a focus with Venus and Mars in your 9th house, place that was associated with the pursuit of truth, whether you're a physicist or a mystic, I like to say. So whether it's science or whether it's yoga or whether, it's Eastern philosophy or just plain studying something that you're really fascinated by, and maybe I don't know, maybe someone's getting into my daughter right now is learning about the water cycle, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be like the world's biggest thing. She's going to like a little science camp. So at any rate, a focus on the higher mind, learning, education, spirituality, beliefs. The 9th house ultimately is about what kinds of things guide us along from an ideological or philosophical standpoint, a conceptual or belief-oriented place that guide our actions in life or that guide our path. Venus and Mars could bring in relational dynamics in there, romance, marriage, love, sexuality. So maybe a conversation around both of those things at the same time, or the presence of beliefs within the context of key relationships. Whatever the case might be, those two planets are coming together in the 9th house, but first they have to work through challenges from Saturn and Uranus. Saturn in the 3rd place, which could be, like mental rigidity, or it could be just a sign of potential conflict or challenges in communicating or talking to people about things that you believe in, or, so maybe some mental, intellectual blockages that you're working through in yourself or with others. And then Uranus in the 6th that wants to be free from conflicts really quickly, or that wants to break away from people or things that you find ideologically restrictive, or it's the moment where you raise your hand in class and you go, I disagree with that. Or it's the moment where you go, that's what I really like, and I need to reorient something in my life and be free of this thing over here so that I can focus more on this thing that I'm now clear is really good for me, or is what I'm aligned with. So I like this as a moment of really finding what makes you kind of finding your due north on your your intellectual or spiritual compass, but needing to work through some relational challenges as you get there, and some pressures or tensions. Don't work through it too quickly. Like, be patient, because by the 13th things will take care of themselves. So don't feel like you need to press the gas pedal on all of this, especially the 1st to the 8th. Okay, now on the 6th, this is a big one. Mercury's been retrograde in your 7th house. You had a solar eclipse in your 7th house. That's a place of relationships and love. Mercury is squaring Neptune one final time. And Mercury squared to Neptune between the 7th house. The focus is on relationships, but there's pressure coming in from Neptune in the 4th house, which means I'm being called to, maybe one of the things that I would watch for would be losing yourself in the needs or demands or obligations or expectations of family members or spouses or partners or their families. So just some potential for loss of clarity or boundaries between the house of marriage and the house of family or home right around the 6th, or possibly coming to some realization that's been developing for a while, because again, you've had this exact same transit last month, and you've had it a few times now. So changes in relationships have been a big deal for Sag risings. And now there's a communication from the 7th house of marriage and relationships to the 4th house of home and family. Watch for that to kind of finalize something, kind of reaching its peak or culmination right around the 6th. Okay, so the last transit is Sun opposite Pluto. Now, Sun opposite Pluto is going to happen across the 2nd and the 8th, with the Sun being in the 8th. This is why I think this is so interesting for Sag risings. That Sun in Cancer in the 8th house really feels, when it opposes Pluto in the 2nd, like there's something that needs to be released, like a debt or a bondage of some kind that's being released or let go of. Sometimes it's going to actually result in, the death of like an aging or, an elderly family member, someone who's ready to pass, not someone that would be like, I don't think, usually I don't see things that are like just out of the blue and tragic, right? But that house, the 8th house of the Cancer Sun in the 8th house opposite Pluto in the 2nd, it's like, an inheritance after someone passes, or the potential release from some kind of emotional bondage that's ancestral or has like family roots. Some kind of transformation around family bonds and karma this month seem really apparent to me for Sag rising. So watch for that peak of transformative energy around family, debts, bonds, emotional obligations to other people, some kind of catharsis right around the 17th. Okay, so those are my transits for Sag risings. Now we're going to go forward to Capricorn rising. Now the T-square energy, if you are a Capricorn, is the focal point is going to be Venus and Mars in the 8th. It's going to oppose Saturn in the 2nd, and you've got the T-squaring from Uranus in the 5th. Now the focal point for you as Capricorn rising, Venus and Mars in the 8th. Something is trying to be, like an agreement is trying to be reached, or some kind of harmonization of resources is trying to be established. Venus and Mars in the 8th is a great sign for people trying to make agreements, or to make important investments, or for other people's resources to kind of come into your life in a positive way. But there are challenges coming in with regard to your own finances or your own need for independence. Kind of like if you were marrying someone and you have to figure out, how are we going to do joint finances? Okay, so there might be some struggles in negotiating things around money or finances a little bit. And there also may be, Uranus in the 5th really likes to have creative independence and creative freedom. Mars and Venus in the 8th is like signing a contract to collaborate with someone. So, you might be working out questions about freedom, independence, agency, autonomy, self-sufficiency, versus something that's something that's trying to alchemize in a place that's really about collaboration of resources. So watch for that to get sorted out by the 13th, but do expect that there might be some challenges or stress around it, for the first like 8 days of the month. Now, we also see Mercury's square to Neptune across the 3rd and the 6th. I would watch for fuzzy communication, unclear or potentially deceptive communication right around the 6th, but also just lack of boundaries. Be really careful of that. Be careful of things kind of falling apart, or even problems with like technology or wording or language barriers, some challenges around that, but also some need to heal or mend things that have been broken or falling apart, like finally coming to some resolution after a lot of technical glitches, a lot of misunderstandings. So potential for some healing communication as well. And finally, we have for Capricorn risings, just like Cancers, it's a big one with the sun opposite Pluto on the 17th. That's coming the focal point of the sun in the 7th house. It's coming from the house of relationships and marriage. So watch for a moment of catharsis or emotional dynamism around the 17th, centered in the house of marriage and relationships. Could be, something happening if you're not in a relationship, happening in your family or around you, or in important friendships. The karma around dad in particular is quite strong at this point, I think, for Capricorns. But a moment of emotional catharsis around key relationships or family dynamics and things like that, family relationships. Also, I like this as the potential for a spouse or partner to go through some kind of important change. Maybe it doesn't really even have anything to do with you, but it's centered on a partner somehow. So watch for that. So those are my key transits if you're a Cap rising. Now, if you're an Aquarius rising, again, one of these fixed signs, this is, along with Leo, to me, the most powerful horoscope of the month because of the focal point of the T-square. Now, the Venus-Mars dynamic is trying to come together in your 7th house of marriage and relationships. So that's the focal point, is relationships for you this month. Harmonization by the 13th. But before that, there's some struggles. Struggle with yourself, your own need to be independent, or the potential for you to remain apart or separate or other, or questions about whether you belong or not, questions about loyalty, questions about commitment, questions about distance, or questions about whether or not you fit in something or not. So kind of an existential moment relative to relationships for Aquarians this month. And then the need for revolution at the roots in terms of living environment, or in terms of moving, or dynamics around home and family. So that the need for kind of a revolution at the roots with Uranus usually means I need a different kind of living environment, or I'm ready for a different kind of living environment. Sometimes this kind of transit could mean that we're working through some tensions as we're moving in together, or we're thinking about moving in or buying some property together, or whatever the case might be. By the 13th, Venus and Mars will bring some kind of harmony into the relationship sphere, but not before some challenges from these other areas I'm mentioning. So we can also look at Mercury's square to Neptune this month from the 5th house to the 2nd. Now, the focal point is going to be Mercury in the 5th. Now, when Mercury in the 5th is the focal point, there's questions about creativity, pleasure, joy, recreation, children, romance. It was called the house of Venus traditionally, the 5th was. And so Mercury's square to Neptune is bringing up those topics, but in relationship to money or finances or assets or resources. So watch for that to peak right around the 6th. There's a little bit of a backstory here. You should be used to these topics by now, since they were very present in June as well. Then finally, on the 17th, we're seeing the Pluto Sun dynamic across the 6th and the 12th. Now, that dynamic, again, I mentioned this in, I believe it was the Leo Risings horoscope, that when you have and the focal point, let me say that really quick, the focal point is the sun in the 6th. When you have transits like this across the cadent houses, it's sometimes like an environmental thing. Like, it's not necessarily something that you'll feel or notice as personally, but at any rate, the sun in the 6th can point to, the 6th was called the joy of Mars, and it can be a place of physical or mental conflict or competition, or even physical work or transformation, like people who are like, hard workers, or like athletes or soldiers, as well as the potential for kind of like intense conflict or frustrations and difficulties. That's what Mars stuff is. So the sun in Cancer is a very emotional, it's a very emotionally dynamic planet when it hits Pluto in the 12th. So I look for some kind of upheaval moment of like a mini crisis that has to be dealt with right around the 17th, but that may be very healing or releasing of pent up energies for you if you're an Aquarius. I think it'll probably be very healing considering it's coming right off from that Venus Mars conjunction in your 7th house of relationships. Maybe the catharsis in relationships this month leads you to need to take some other kind of action, or there's some second step that you have to take to really clear things. So that's the sun opposite Pluto right around the 17th. Okay, last but not least, as always, our Pisces rising. The focalization of the T-square is with Venus and Mars in your 6th. Now, the 6th place, as I was saying for my last sign, Aquarius, that's the place that was associated with Mars. The 6th was called the joy of Mars, and it has to do with sort of slaving, hard work, drudgery, but also kind of sacrificial things, hardworking things, laboring things, like a soldier who gives their life in battle, or, you know, an athlete who trains so hard, you know, sacrifices a lot to get to their goal. So it's very Marsy house. So Venus Mars coming together in that house, I like the idea of there being eventual resolution by the 13th of this month where there has been conflict or frustration or some kind of hard work really paying off right around the 13th. But until then, it's a bit of a pressure cooker. Saturn in the 12th, dealing with deep unconscious resistances to change, or dealing with things that are tough physically or mentally. And then Uranus in the 3rd, also the need to kind of break free of old mental patterns. So for Pisceans this month, it feels really existential. And I asked for feedback from my Virgos, and I want the same from my Pisceans this month, because to me, this is one of the most interesting ones. And when I see really interesting stuff, you know, that I've never seen before, I learn the most when I make sure that I ask people to like tell me what you end up experiencing. So yeah, to me, this is a moment though of like frustration and kind of pent up blockages getting released physically, mentally, emotionally, and maybe within the context of key relationships in your life by the 13th of the month. Okay, now again, if you're a mutable sign, Mercury square to Neptune, this is going to be a big deal too. This is on the 6th. Mercury as the focal point is in your 4th house of home, family, living environment. It's squaring Neptune in the 1st house of identity, physical body, health. So, you know, is there something, are you trying to clarify? I mean, when Neptune's been in your 1st house for a long time, right? And Jupiter's in your 1st house right now too. So there's an emphasis on self, body, health, personal direction. It's very existential for Pisceans right now in the 1st house. A lot of opportunities growing for you, but it's in this kind of dialogue with the living environment in your life, or the family or home karma. So watch for that to be a dynamic once again, as it was in June, right around the 6th. Now, finally, the sun will be opposite Pluto by the 17th. Now, the sun is the focal point in the 5th house. I have to say, for my Pisceans, I'm wondering if some of my Piscean people out there aren't getting pregnant this month, or just recently got pregnant, because you've got the sun in a water sign like Cancer in the 5th house of pregnancy and children. It's getting this big catharsis from Pluto in the 11th, which will often come when a woman, for example, or a man or whatever, or like anyone is trying to prepare themselves for a big social shift in terms of how they're seen and how they relate to the world. Like, I'm becoming a parent. That's going to totally change the social dynamics of my life. I also like this as a moment of reorienting your social life because of things that are happening with your kids. For example, once you have kids, in my experience, it's a lot easier to hang out with other people that have kids. It's like it becomes a little bit more challenging when people don't have kids to develop like a bond. There's exceptions to that, of course. Like I'm thinking of some of my best friends who, you know, don't have kids, and like they're like, you know, an uncle or something like that comes over. But the point being that the social reality of your life could change in relationship to things involving pregnancy, children, or family right now. The other thing that you could be looking at with the sun as the focal point in the fifth, would be questions about what's really bringing you emotional security and pleasure and happiness, and what might need to, and how that's changing in what am I trying to say? The fifth house sun in Cancer is like, what brings me a sense of peace, security, joy, happiness, and safety. You could think about it like that. Satisfaction emotionally. Now, the catharsis with Pluto in the 11th, that might be involving or simultaneously tied into groups, social scenes that I'm a part of. So some connection there maybe between what brings joy or happiness and security and what kind of groups you're with or shouldn't be with or need to be with but aren't yet, something like that. Watch for pretty dynamic moment of change around the 17th with regard to these topics. So that is what I have got for everyone this month, all 12 signs. I would love to hear from you guys in terms of how you are already experiencing this. Remember that these transits peak in the next week. So, I mean, the next couple of days, some of them are coming through right away. So for a lot of us, these should be pretty immediate. You should be able to recognize some of these topics pretty immediately. But if there are other topics in the houses that I didn't cover, it's kind of hard to go through all of them because these houses are like, very multidimensional. So it's super hard without a birth chart, doing it for lots of people, to quite quickly summarize things. But if there's topics activated by these transits that I haven't mentioned, I'd also love to hear from some of you who know a bit about the houses, how you're also seeing some of these transits occur in your own chart and so forth. Especially my Virgos and Pisces. I really want to hear your stories this month. We will have more content ahead this week. I hope you guys have already taken a look at the July overview as well. And we'll talk again soon. Take it easy, everyone. Bye.